All right, so my goal today really, hopefully have a bit of fun together. I'm going to do my best to do a live build together as well, which is always super fun and super nervous doing in front of everybody because it'll work 99% of the time and then it'll break when I'm doing a demo to somebody. So we'll see how that goes. But if there's one big thing I want to get across, and my big goal for today is what I've got on screen here. We're at a point where literally anyone can now build software. Damien and myself, just to give you a little bit of background, we have a business called Right Tech. Our big slogan has always been build with tech, not teams. Not that we have any problem with you hiring teams, but the idea being that software and the cost of software and that sort of thing shouldn't be the limiting factor to you being able to grow your business. And so the exciting thing for us is that we're actually entering an age now where it's getting even easier for people. And so you would think if there's one person who should be not telling you about this, it should be me, because I get paid lots of money to do this for people. But actually, Damien and I are both super excited about this because it means we now don't have that barrier to entry that so many people had. And my commitment to everybody that's on this call today and everybody that watches this is that hopefully by the end of today, you'll see how easy it is now to actually start building your own applications. And that really, as I say here, the bottleneck is no longer skill. It really is imagination at this point. There are a lot of different AI tools out there. I'm not going to go through all of them. They all have their pros and cons. But what we are going to look at today is most of today, I'm going to focus on GPT Codex. And we might, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about Claude Code as well. Two main reasons. There's lots of other ones, Lovable, Replit, a bunch of these other kind of AI software tools that have come out. But at least from our experience, Claude Code and Codex, you can basically do anything you can imagine with them. And so you don't necessarily need the overhead of these other tools. Not saying they don't have their place in the market, but just, you'll see today exactly how easy it is with Codex. We put our money where our mouth is, or a better way to say it is we've taken money out of our budget for software tools and to put where our mouth is. Before kind of even saying anything online about AI, vibe coding, etc., we gave ourselves a task of how can we streamline our own business using AI to prove that this is not just hype and that this is something that can actually make an impact to businesses. And so we went through our tech stack. We found, I think it's probably exceeded $2,000 a month at this point, but at the time of creating this deck, it was about $2,000 a month worth of software that we were paying licenses for that we've been able to replace. And I'll actually show you some real world examples of those tools that we've replaced as we go through this today. And the big thing I want to say here, this is not an attack on SaaS tools. They all still have their place in the market. Not any one of these tools that we've built is not necessarily going to be as fully featured as somebody that spent millions of dollars on building a piece of SaaS software. But one of the things I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about the philosophy that we use to decide what to replace. And a lot of the time it came down to these SaaS tools, while they might focus on a niche, they're often trying to do a lot of things for a lot of people, right? And so you might be paying $97 a month, $197 a month, whatever it may be, and you're getting a very fully featured piece of software, but the reality is you're only using 10% of it. And so that was sort of our philosophy, was understanding the shift on what is now possible, and then working out how we can take the pieces that we need of that software and use AI to replace it so that we get what we want the way we want it without paying an ongoing license to somebody else for a bigger piece of software that we didn't need. And so in terms of today's agenda, I've already started touching on this. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we go. But the big thing, I really want to get practical today. I really want you to see how easy this is now. And so I'm going to walk you through the process that we use internally for creating prompts to give the AI to help us create these applications. I'm going to walk you through exactly the architectures that we suggest so that as you're building these applications, prompt the AI to use the right type of software coding languages, etc. We'll attempt to do a live build together, and then we'll talk about deployment and scaling. So right up front, I'll say we really, there's a number of different ways of hosting these applications, but we really like using Cloudflare. I know Cloudflare has had a little bit of a bad reputation in the market lately. It's got a bit of bad press with a few outages that killed the internet. But I feel like if, their claim is that they run about 20% of the internet, and I figure if you can run 20% of the internet for 363 days a year, you're probably doing a pretty good job. All right. So, and the cool thing about them, they have very, very generous free plans. Sound like I'm being a salesman for them. That's certainly not my intention, but it's a really great platform to build these tools on. And essentially not have to pay any hosting fees unless your app explodes. And then even then, at that point, if you go viral and you've got hundreds or thousands of users, their pricing is extremely reasonable for what's in the market. And then last but not least, your biggest question, and probably one of the biggest things we're helping companies with at the moment, is the security side of vibe coding. It is very easy to make mistakes and to expose things that shouldn't be exposed when working with AI. And so we will walk through together a lot of what we do to put guardrails in place and just general best practice on how to protect yourself these applications. So yeah, I guess before I dive in, before we carry on with this particular presentation, I'll walk you through a few of the things that we've built. But are there any sort of immediate questions or anything that's unclear on what I've said so far that anybody wants to tackle? Sorry, I'm just bringing up my little chat window so I can see if anybody's asked any questions. Cool. I'll take silence as that we're okay to continue. So just to show you quickly a few of the tools that we've built, start with this one. This is a tool that we've used to help create a lot of our own social media content. This is all vibe coded. This one in particular was done with Claude Code, but could just as easily be done with Codex that we're going to use as the example today. So you can see here, this one, it uses image AI to generate the images. It uses ChatGPT to help generate the posts. And even one of the really cool things is we've got a bulk scheduler that can schedule across LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. And the AI built all of those integrations for us. So it integrated into Go High Level, integrated into Meta, into HeyGen, into LinkedIn. So HeyGen, for anybody that doesn't know, is what we use for creating these AI avatars. So you might have seen this post promoting today's session, which is actually an AI avatar generated by HeyGen. And all of this was done purely using, quote unquote, vibe coding and including all of the integrations into these third-party platforms and everything. So the initial reason why you wanted to use this one as an example, great example of how you can pull in multiple different types of technology. So we use one AI for the images, another AI for the descriptions, but then also how the AI can actually help you connect into other systems. And so if you're sitting there right now, you've got, say, a CRM system that you're using, and it sort of does most of what you want, but there's this one feature that you really wish it could do. As long as that CRM system has a robust API, which nowadays most of these kind of tools do, there's nothing stopping you from branching off and creating this little tool on the side that can add that extra functionality for you. without you needing to necessarily rebuild the whole CRM as well. So that's one quick example. I'll come back to that one in a moment. This is another one that I just personally built for myself. I've tried a number of different task trackers over the years, Monday, Asana, and all of them, I always struggled that they just didn't quite work the way I operate. My days tend to be very disjointed. I have to context shift a lot, which is actually how I like working, so that's not a problem. But what it does mean is trying to schedule my days appropriately can be really challenging. And so this one, as an example, I built in a little AI agent where I just tell it, so you can see here, I created an example task. Here's my task. It's going to take me an hour. It's a high impact task and high urgency. And it automatically looks at my schedule for the week. And based on training I've given it on how to prioritize things, it then provides me with suggestions and says, okay, well, you should do this one at 2:57 on Monday or Tuesday or whatever. And then as new tasks come in, I can quite literally just tell it, hey, here's a new task. It automatically, in fact, let me show you as an example real quick. Example task 2, 1 hour, high urgency, high importance. So I will just tell it there quickly. And then what you should see is it has created the task for me. Oh, what did it do? Yeah, so it's created the task and it will have scheduled it most likely later in the week, for depending on what I've got going on in my schedule. So a quick question here. Are you still paying subs for all the Vibe coding platforms and HeyGen? HeyGen, yeah, absolutely. There's a number of tools that we pay either some sort of subscription, or often it's now more usage-based, so token-based, for example. So if we look at this particular application, each image we generate costs something like 3 cents. Every description we generate costs, I think, fractions of a cent. Maybe cost $1 per video generation. But all up, a post like this one, yeah, maybe cost me $1. The post like this one is maybe 15 cents. So yeah, there are probably, if I look at the stack here, for example, the only one here we're paying a monthly license for is Go High Level, which is what we use as our main CRM. And yeah, we use that for publishing and contact tracking and that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully that helped answer that question. Another good example, we were paying quite a lot of money for tools to send out cold emails for us. So this was one that Damien built out for us, where it automatically sends out emails to prospective clients for us. So this one definitely a bit more tricky. You definitely need a bit more understanding of mail systems and that kind of. But once again, all built with sort of vibe coding, and just to show you kind of level of complexity you can get to when when you start piecing these puzzle pieces together. We've got a few more, but I think that kind of gives you a broad range of the types of things that we can build. When we do the Q&A at the end, if there's any other specific applications you want to see, say we've got a whole kind of treasure trove of them that we've built for ourselves. We can show you some more examples. So another question, GHL has an email manager. Why do you use the custom built one over that? Yeah, great question. So the custom built one is specifically for cold outreach. So the tool helps with email inbox warm up. It helps with managing the domain performance. It just helps with making sure that we're staying compliant with spam rules and that kind of. Whereas our GHL, for example, used very much for a very for our main domain that only goes to warmed up in clients and that sort of thing. Okay, and so getting back to a little bit of the philosophy before we dive into actually kind of a real world example together. It's not all roses and sunshine when it comes to vibe coding. There are definitely cost savings to be had in terms of paying monthly licenses, as I've talked about. But there's certainly hidden time costs in terms of your own time to build these applications. Things go wrong, it's all up to you to go and figure out how to fix them. And so, it's not necessarily throw out all your software and vibe code solutions to each of them. The philosophy we very much follow is, have you got an idea about something that could either enhance your day-to-day workflow, or, maybe as I said before, you're paying for a very big, expensive piece of software, but really only using a fraction of it. And can you isolate that fraction into something that's a much simpler application that's just, for you, or maybe just for you and a few team members, so it doesn't need all that same infrastructure. We then use AI to generate the MVP, and I'm going to show you exactly how we do that. And then lots of iteration. If I go into my task tracker as an example, something I've started getting the AI to do for me is on every project, I actually get it to create a little change log. So you can see here, I started with my original version, which was just based on my MVP. I'm now already 13 versions in. And each one of these are just slight little tweaks, fixes an error in project or user interface improvements. And so kind of being, Rome wasn't built in a day. We don't need to build the ultimate application from day one. We start with something small, we test it, we get it working, and then we iterate on it and improve it. I don't know. Yeah, this one here is up to version 2.30. And I think it got up to about version 50 before it switched to version 2. So this one's probably had 80 iterations on it to get it to this point, right? So yeah, something to keep in mind. And then the barrier to entry, very much lifted now, particularly with the integration into things like Cloudflare for hosting. And so what I think we'll do as a quick example, just so that you can actually see a practical creation of a tool together, I'll attempt to create an application for everybody using Codex before we carry on with the presentation. Now, I did a little survey beforehand about what would be useful to see, and a number of people brought up having some sort of habit tracker would be something that they would want to build for themselves. And so I thought we could attempt to build a habit tracker together and see AI build something in front of us. And so I've created an initial description here of what the habit tracker could do. I've said, build a simple habit tracker application, helps users create, maintain positive daily routines, blah, blah, blah. This could absolutely just be a brain dump. This doesn't have to be very well structured. Really, we'll talk a little bit more when we go back to the presentation, but there's a few key things I suggest you include in here. But one thing I'm going to send out to you all is I've built this GPT for myself called the MVP Brief Builder. And essentially what it does is it allows me to just brain dump what I want the application to do. And it'll take that, it'll ask me questions if there's things that it thinks are going to be unclear for an AI tool to know how to code. And it is also going to use a framework that Damien developed on how to write technologies to use depending on the complexity of the application. And so as an example, I'll just send this prompt to it and let it do its thing. And while we let it do that, I see there's a couple more questions come in, so I'll answer those. Does the task tracker integrate with your GHL? Great question. It will do. It doesn't yet, but it will ultimately integrate with GHL, and it'll integrate with my calendar as well, so that it can plan tasks around my calendar. And one thing, because I do a lot of driving as well, I'm going to integrate it with WhatsApp so that I can actually just have conversations with it while I'm driving through WhatsApp and have it plan my day while I'm driving. So yeah, some really cool stuff that you can do there. And then another question here, could you explain why I use both Claude and ChatGPT? Two reasons. One, purely for our own internal testing to stay on top of, does what better. So we often split test building applications across both of them to see how they perform. One thing, and it'll be interesting to see as we do this Codex project together today, I tend to find Codex might understand things and create the application framework a lot better, but Claude Code often does a better job of making things look nice and be really user-friendly. So, those kind of answers. And we also tend to find Codex is a lot better at the security side of things. So it can often pick up security holes a lot better than Claude Code can. But to be honest, these things are changing so fast. Claude might release a new model next week and blow Codex out of the water. So just trying to stay on top of those things as we go. Okay, so back to my MVP builder. You can see here a few focus questions. Is this one user only? User sees simple calendar. So I'll just answer these quickly. Just for me, this simple calendar would be a good idea. Just constraint, let's try and keep it free. Should habit data be stored? Yes, let's store locally. Cool. So I'm just going to let it build out the brief based on those answers. And yeah, I think it mutes me when I'm talking to it, but basically I was just telling it what to change. Cool. Okay, so it's built out the whole framework there for me on the application. And so now I'm going to copy all of that. I could have just used the copy button at the bottom, but that's all right. And I'm going to jump back into Codex. First thing I'm going to do in Codex is I'm just going to give it a folder on my computer to build in. So I'm going to say here, is the folder you can build this project in. I'm just going to tell it, there we go. This is a habit tracker. Please create. Oops, hang on. I'll just swap this out. There we go. Here are the MVP details. Cool. And then, oops, I'll just paste in that the habit tracker brief. Make sure that's all there. Yep. Cool. Now, one thing on most of these tools, it's not always super obvious, but something that they've all started recently adding is something that they call plan mode. So always recommend starting with plan mode. Basically gives the AI a bit more leeway to go away and think about what it's doing and why it's doing it. and then come back to you with a plan of what it's going to do before it just jumps in and does its thing. So I've just turned plan mode on there, and we'll just let that go away and do its thing. It'll take a few minutes. And while we do that, I'll cover a few more questions. What did you train the MVP Builder GPT on? Just my own experience, to be honest. Lots of trial and error and mistakes and finding holes in software that I'd built that could have been avoided by giving it better information to start with. And in my workflow, delivery rate generation and Claude Code. Yeah, cool. So Joshua said here, often separates Claude Code and Codex, reduce errors and bias. Absolutely. That's a really great point. We often get one model to the work of the other model. So one can try and find holes in what the other one's doing. Now, when most of these tools, you drop in the initial information, it's often going to come back to you with questions. Do you want me to allow to check with the demo tracker folder? Yeah, that's fine. This is all basically just wants to make sure that there's no other code already in that folder that it's going to overwrite. Most of the time you can just tell it to go ahead. So cool. You can see here now it's writing the plan for me on what it's going to do. It's bringing in the recommendations the GPT made on what languages it's going to use. And so I won't bore everybody by going, and normally I'd spend a bit of time reading this and making sure it's all right. But we're just jumping in feet first here, live. So we'll see what it can do. So yep, I'm going to let it implement its plan. And yeah, this might take a few seconds, but essentially what you'll see now is it'll go away and start building it. It's now writing the code for me. And we'll give that a few minutes to do its thing. What did you do to get the old clip? This is like one of my favorite things of Windows 11. Hopefully I haven't got anything I shouldn't be showing you on my clipboard, but if you press Windows V, can bring up all of your old things that you've copied and pasted. And the cool thing is you can even pin things. So I've got phone numbers and things pinned here so that I don't have to go and copy and paste them from somewhere else all the time. It's an awesome little feature that they added. But that's just a little side note. Cool. Any other questions while we let this run and do its thing in the background? I sometimes use Lovable to build the first front-facing piece of the app, upload, get posted. Yeah, no, absolutely. So cool point there. We do the same. We often will there are certain tools that can do a much better job of designing the front end look and feel of either a website or an application. And so you can use those tools, things like Lovable, to do the design and then take the screenshot or even take the HTML that it generates for you and turn that into the finished product. And this is, sorry, I should have said, this is GPT Codex that I'm in here now. This is a desktop application that you download and install on your computer. Can build it in the browser as well, but I prefer using the desktop version. It's got more access to the resources of my computer. And yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. Let's see, what's it asking me? Apps are built working, cool. Do you want to allow me to copy them from habit tracker files into demo? Yes, you can, go for it. In your experience, what application does a better backend? Claude, Codex, Space 44, Lovable? Damien, you might have some thoughts on this, but I would say Claude so far does the best job on backend development, right? I mean, Codex does it too, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought it's okay. The latest version of 5.5 is pretty good. but Opus 4.6 is just the topmost thing in terms of backend.
Yeah, we tend to find that things like Base 44 and Lovable and Replit, they often over-engineer things quite a lot, and a lot of them have sort of training biases. I mean, even Claude and Codex have training biases, but as an example, a lot of the time these AI tools will immediately want to use React for their applications, which is not always necessarily the right thing to do. In the GPT that I'll give you guys, he actually specifically prompt it on when the right time is to use what language. So that will help around that bias a little bit. But it's particularly Lovable. Like when we've done things on Lovable in the past, it generates a huge amount of bloat code in the background that we didn't really need it to, which causes issues further down the track. And that's why we really like Codex and Claude, because it's often a lot more lightweight than some of these other tools. Cool. Yeah. So question here about deployment and hosting. Well, I'll circle back to that one because there's definitely a big topic we need to talk about. Okay, cool. So you can see here, this has worked for a total of 4 minutes, and it's now got my habit tracker. Moment of truth. Let's see what it actually does for us. Okay, cool. So at the moment, this is just hosted on my computer. Like I say, we'll circle back to hosting this live. So you can see here, 4 minutes with that information I've given it. It's built a habit tracker for me. I can add a habit here. Drink more water. Note or target 10,000 liters a day. Good example there. For some reason, that add habit button's potentially not working. Although just to quadruple check that, I'm going to open it in my browser. Let's try it this way. Bang. More water. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. So straight away you can see, there's something not quite right with that button. Really good example. We'll come back to that, but there we go. It's now added my habit. Can mark that as complete for the day. Current streak, longest streak. Let's see what happens if I add another habit now. Does it work now? Yep, cool. There we go. And so I'm going to mark that for complete for today. Mark as complete. So there you go. All of that in 4 minutes, let's call it 10 minutes, including the time to go through the MVP brief builder and the process with Codex. Now, a few questions that come in, so let me look at these and respond to these quickly. Do you have specific guidelines for when to use the right coding language? Yes, we do. The GPT will cover it, but I've also got a slide on it, which I'll share with you guys. So I'll walk you through exactly that in a moment. Where is it storing the habits right now if there is no database? Great question. So once again, in the GPT I'll give you, we actually prompt all of our applications knowing that there's a good chance we're going to use Cloudflare for it. We actually prompt it to design the application in a way that it's going to use, I think it's called D1 on Cloudflare, right, Damien? The databases. And so it'll build all the infrastructure for the database. And then when you actually publish this to Cloudflare, it'll create all of the database for you and the database links and everything. So that's all baked into the GPT I'll give you as well. But any other immediate questions about this, about the process, before I sort of continue on with the presentation? Claude is telling me the select a repo first error is telling you that workspace needs to be attached to Git repo. Okay, yeah, good question. So once again, depending a little bit, part of the reason why I like using the desktop version of Codex is I can connect it all into my local file structure directly on my computer. I don't have to worry about having connected up to GitHub for source code control or anything like that. Same goes with the Claude Code desktop application. Whereas if you use the cloud versions, they will 99 times out of 100 want you to connect into some sort of repository to keep all of the source code in. Now, even with the desktop applications, if it's something that I'm going to be working on ongoing, I will connect it into GitHub just as a safety layer so that the code is stored somewhere else, not on my computer. But yeah, I would assume that if you're getting that response from Claude, it's most likely because you're using the cloud version, and so it needs something to connect to be able to put all the source code in. But that's the type of thing that happy to have a chat and help resolve after the call for you guys as well. One other really cool thing, just a side note with using the desktop version, when you use the desktop version, you can actually give like Claude Code or Codex access to parts of your computer and analyze your hardware and that kind of stuff. So I've quite literally used Codex to fix issues with my desktop where something was not loading properly, or like I had an issue the other day where my keyboard would just not connect to my computer. And so Codex was able to go and look at all the files on my computer and figure out what was going on. So yeah, some good advantages to using the actual desktop version as well. What sort of security settings should we have for Codex? Yeah, I'll circle back to that in a moment. That's quite a big topic, and I've got a whole slide dedicated to that. So I'll make sure we circle back to that because it is very important. Can you show us a bit more about publishing to Cloudflare? Yeah, absolutely. Cloudflare has a deployment process called Wrangler. It's essentially a system that can allow us to push all of the code from our desktop, for example, to the deployment that it sets up for us on Cloudflare. It's probably a bit much to cover today, but I am more than happy to do a follow-on session where we just go through the Wrangler process together. It's mainly some initial setup. Once you do the initial setup and get it working, because of the prompts that we use, like say all the code that's written by Codex knows straight away what type of database, what type of workers, etc. Cloudflare has. And so it sets it all up for that and then uses Wrangler to publish directly to Cloudflare for us. As an example, if I go back to this one, see here we have this Right Tech Workers dev, which is just an area in Cloudflare where the applications can be deployed to. And so it's as easy as literally just say to Codex, okay, please deploy to Cloudflare, and it will handle all of the publishing of the code up to the web for you. And then you can set up like a domain name, etc. if you want. Cool. So here's the question around the different web infrastructures we recommend. So if it's just a static website that you're building, most of the time, just straight HTML and CSS is really all you need. Maybe a little bit of JavaScript, depending on if you want some cool animations and that kind of stuff. For web applications, here's the stack that we recommend. Damien can talk a lot more to these. These are the kind of framework that he's developed for us internally. But once again, this is all broken down in the GPT that I'll send you. So depending on, once you describe to it what the application has to do, we'll automatically put it into, say, like one of these buckets for you and work out what the right technology to use under the hood is. Most of the time, if you're doing something like the habit tracker, for example, you're going to fall into this web apps bucket. And so these are the recommended frameworks and languages, etc., that we suggest. You don't need to know too much about them while you're building applications for yourself, but can always go and read up about them. And yeah, they're all industry standard frameworks. They're all very well supported and, very secure, etc. These are responsive for mobile. Yeah, so that's actually one of the biggest shifts I've seen probably in the last few months. When we first started down this track, a lot of the time these applications would not be very mobile friendly out of the box. Even just in the last sort of couple of months, the models have got significantly better at just building them to be mobile friendly straight away. So, for example, like if I jump into, let's use the task tracker one as an example, because that's, in fact, let's see what it did with this one. Nothing like some live testing. So yeah, there we go. You can see it straight away. Got it all optimized for mobile. I didn't even have to tell it to do anything to do that. I will say there have been some applications I've worked on for clients, mainly more complex dashboard, for example, of all of their business analytics. Didn't do a great job of making that one mobile friendly. But it was also the type of application that didn't really need to be mobile friendly. It's not the type of thing that they pull up on their mobile. It's the type of thing they have up on screens in the warehouse. So it wasn't a big deal. But a lot of the time, it's as simple as telling the AI, okay, I need a mobile friendly version of this. And provided it's not something that's got lots of grids and spreadsheet style and all that kind of stuff, it can usually create the mobile friendly version pretty quickly for you. So starting to touch a little bit on the security and debugging side of things. Another reason why I like using the desktop version is as long as I know that my desktop is secure and I'm not publishing anything online, there's limited access anybody can get. The minute you start publishing to things like Cloudflare or even GitHub for that matter, you immediately start adding in a degree of security risk that you need to be aware of. And so this is where once the actual GPT I've given you adds some guardrails in automatically, publishing to Cloudflare adds a degree of guardrails in as well for security. But I'll often, before publishing anything online, now in my case, if I've developed it in Codex, for example, I'll often use Claude to then go and analyze the code and essentially give it the task of being an ethical hacker, right? And I ask it to try and hack the application, find all the holes in it, and then provide me a report of all the holes that it found. And then I give that report back to Codex, and I get Codex to go and fix all those holes and just iterate a couple of times like that. You can use Codex to do that to itself as well. There's no need to have all these multiple models doing it. Particularly if it's just sort of a tool for yourself and it hasn't got anything too private in there. Like I say on here, in terms of debugging, errors are normal, as you saw there on that first application. For some reason, that one button doesn't work very well. Not a big deal. We test it. We let the AI know that there was an issue with that particular button. And change I've seen even just in the last few months, the AI is getting really good at identifying problems as long as you can point out what the problem was initially. That said, another thing that I tend to do, I don't think I've built this into the GPT, but I more and more now from the very beginning of the project, I will make sure that the AI actually sets up some sort of error logging process in the application it builds. And so that way, when there are errors, particularly if you're trying to connect like that application where I've connected into GHL and HeyGen, etc., when those tools return an error, I want those errors logged in the application. So then I can just say to the AI, hey, HeyGen is not generating for some reason. And then it can go and check the logs. It can see what the error that HeyGen was that it sent back. And then based on that, it can go and work out what changes it needs to make to fix it. The other side, in terms of the actual security, if you're building something for yourself where you're not having lots of other users, and particularly if you're keeping it on your desktop, not such a big deal. The minute you want to start adding other users use it, you immediately want to get it to obviously do things like add in username and password, and then getting the AI to audit itself to make sure that username and password is actually being used throughout the code to prevent people from getting access to things they shouldn't. So a prime example of that, I did an application a couple of weeks ago, put a login screen over the top, which all looked very flash, but then it turned out you could basically browse to any page you wanted with that. Like, as long as you had the URL, you could go to that page and use it regardless of whether you were logged in or not, right? And so simply the fact that it put a login in place didn't necessarily mean it was actually using that login throughout the application to protect the data. So those are the types of things that you want to look out for. Over time. You will learn to get it to check for. Limit access. If it doesn't need to be an application that's being used by lots of people throughout the internet, then consider putting it on private domain or something that's maybe even locked in behind a firewall internally, so that really only people that you trust have access to it. And then this is the big one. This is the one that you've probably seen in the news somewhere. It's one of the probably arguably the biggest mistakes we see people make. Is you go, AI prompts you throughout the process and says, hey, you want to use GPT under the hood. Like, for example, in my task tracker, I use GPT under the hood for processing all of my tasks. It asks me for the GPT API key. I give it, and then it goes and publishes my GPT API key into a public GitHub repository for anybody to go and view. And the next thing you know, racked up a massive API bill because somebody's got a hold of your API key and they're using it for who knows what. Those are the types of things you just want to be very conscious of anytime you're giving some sort of password, some sort of security key, what not to do. So again, these are all based on experience of what we've seen auditing people's vibe coded web apps. This is often the biggest one. There's no authentication. They've published some application online that has no login screens, no anything, and has all sorts of sensitive data. And it's sort of a no-brainer, but it's also very easy to overlook when you're building these sorts of tools out. Particularly if it starts as a small MVP that doesn't have a whole lot of sensitive stuff and grows and grows and grows. And then at some point you're like, wow, I've got all this financial information in there and I forgot to put a login screen in front of it, right? Exposed API keys, we've talked about. And then blind trust in the AI output is another one. The AI does its best to follow best practice. It's getting better all the time. But like I say, it makes mistakes. Like the example I gave where it put a login screen in front. I mean, I had another one where it put a login screen and you could quite literally right click on the login screen, and about HTML, you could hide the login and then carry on using the application, right? That's where, particularly if it is something that has sensitive data in, you'd want to prompt the AI several times to quality check and sanity check itself, or better yet, use a separate AI tool to go and test it. Save lots of versions. That's where things like GitHub comes in helpful. You can save versions, you can roll back, etc. I'm more than happy to go through the setup of that at some stage together as well. And this is a big one. As you would have seen in my example with the task tracker, I do very small iterations at a time. If a button's not working, I just tell the AI to fix that button. If the button's not working and 5 other things are not working on the page, I don't tell it all 5 at once and get it to try and fix all 5 at once, because invariably it's going to trip itself up. But if you have one problem, you tell it what to fix and you let it do that, make sure it works, and then move on to the next problem, move on to the next one. It does a lot better job of iterating on itself that way. Hosting on Cloudflare, like I said, we use Cloudflare. So Cloudflare Pages for deploying any sort of front end, website, web page, etc. Really great for deploying those for free. You can host those all for free on there. Cloudflare Workers for any sort of code or things that need to run in any sort of logic. And then, what they call KV and D1 are their options for databases. And also have very generous free tiers that you can use so that all of these applications are running within one Cloudflare account and not costing us anything. I'll put together some resources on security think that's probably the easiest place to start, is if I give you some prompts and guardrails that you can add into your projects, just to know there's a baseline of security built in. And then we're doing pretty good on time, so we might even have time to talk about the deployment stuff. I'll send out this presentation because it's got some other tips and tricks here on, the processes we use for auditing, process that we use internally for return on investment, about whether or not it's even worth trying to rebuild something. If you ever want to have us take a look at anything, always happy to jump in and do a bit of an audit and provide some feedback. So I'll open the floor. I've got one more topic to cover, but I'll open the floor again if there's any other questions or comments or feedback or anything. Would love to hear it now before I carry on with the last bit of the presentation.
Thank you very much for giving up your time and organizing this. It's been awesome. One of the biggest barriers to entry for me has been that I'm actually not a techie. I know a little bit around stuff and I've played around the tools, but I'm to bloody deck to deploy anything. And it's also, and also not wanting to kind of, start getting massive API bills or listing bills or using up tokens and all that sort of thing. So I think best practice around how to do those things would be like super, super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Also just that just even knowing about, hearing, for instance, building something in, say, Lovable and then putting it into Claude and then like changing it up to Codex and then figuring out whether or not there's like holes in it. I think that's been super helpful.
Yeah.
So,
awesome. Yeah, no, you raise a really good point. It's something I should have actually put in the presentation. So nowadays, most of these tools are giving you the ability to put restrictions on your spend on API usage or token usage. Definitely recommend making good use of that. Even for myself, when we connected a Nano Banana key, I forgot to go and set in a restriction, and it spent like about $60 or $70 on image generation before I noticed, which thankfully wasn't a big deal. But there's horror stories of people spending thousands of dollars on API tokens without realizing. So definitely suggest any of these things that you're connecting into. It is very easy for AI to make a mistake and set some sort of trigger that recurs on itself over and over and over and hits some API thousands of times that it shouldn't. And if you're paying for each request or something like that, the bill can rack up very quickly. And so on Nano Banana, for example, on GPT, we set in restrictions that, hey, you're only allowed to spend, $50 before you alert me. And, set up a hard cap of you're allowed to spend $100 a month and then turn off usage and let me know. So worst case scenario, my application stops working and then I know I need to go digging, or, I can ask Codex and it'll tell me, hey, you've hit the limit on GPT. But yeah, it's a really good point. Highly recommend setting up those restrictions in whatever tool you're connecting into if you can, to prevent some sort of, particularly if you're creating an application that other users can use. There was a really funny case study not long ago where somebody worked out that I can't remember who the company was, but one of the company's live chatbots basically just gave you free access to the latest model of ChatGPT. And so all these people were hitting up their chatbot, just using it like ChatGPT to ask it to do all sorts of things. And I'd hate to see what their GPT bill was behind the scenes once people figured that out, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions in the chat? If ChatGPT Premium, does that not include tokens for Codex? Yeah, so Codex, I believe you only get access to if you have ChatGPT Premium. On Claude Code, for example, right now, there was talk about them removing it. I don't know, they may have backpedaled on that since their deal with Elon, but there was talk of them removing it from the entry-level plan, the first tier of paid plan. but both Codex and Claude Code, you get built in with your Claude subscription. Just have a separate usage tier, or usage limits, I should say. Like on Claude Code, for example, you get a certain amount of limits every 4-hour block of the day, depending on what plan you're on. You hit that limit, and then you have to pause using it up until the next 4-hour block, and then you get a weekly limit as well. But the limits, like if you're just doing it for day-to-day building of your own applications, you're highly unlikely to go over those usage limits. Internally, we hit them all the time, but we're building applications across dozens of clients, as well as our own applications and that sort of thing. But for personal use, I think you find even the entry level sort of, what are they, $20, $30 a month plans will allow you to build most of the tools that you want internally.
Just a couple of questions, like you're saying, let's say you did deploy an MVP, you had some logins and you were having to set conditions. So for instance, like you were like piloting it with some organizations or what have you. How easy is that to kind of manage using these tools?
Yeah, so I don't know, Damien, do you want to touch on the security and deployment side at all, or?
I think the calls for a separate workshop.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth. I'm more than happy to run a separate workshop purely around security. It sounds like we've got enough interest in that. But yeah, I think a couple of things that immediately come to mind when you're building the MVP. As part of your prompt, just letting the AI know, like even if right now it's an internal tool, if you intend on it later having users, tell it from day one that you're ultimately going to have, I'm intending, and even tell it like, hey, this is going to have, to 20 users, or hey, I intend this to have thousands of users, because there are some things it may do differently, knowing that. So that's one element, but honestly, probably one of the biggest things for me personally with that sort of thing is using that sort of that white hat hacker approach of, particularly if you can use one tool to try and hack the other tool. That is, it does pick up a lot of things often going down that route. That even having all the right guardrails and everything in place while you're prompting the build, still miss things. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is comes down a lot to where you are hosting it as well. That's why, like Cloudflare, because there is some inherent security things that it adds. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's not going to protect you against code that's written that lets anybody through the front door. Right? So yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, no, happy to go through a session on security together.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions from anyone? Looks like the chat's gone quiet, so I think we're getting there. I'm sure as this all digests, there might be more questions, and so feel free to reach out. As we're wrapping up, see a few more questions. I will come back to those. In terms of, I said going into this I wouldn't pitch anything, and so this is my pitch to not pitch you anything. One thing we are doing, which everybody here would be great to have you part of, we are trying to create a little community. It's a free community where we all, we have a bit of a forum. We're using the WAP platform, if you're familiar with it. Where the idea is basically just create a forum where we can chat, we can share ideas, we can share wins, losses, etc. together, tips and tricks. And so when I send out the email, I will include how to join that. And yeah, it would be really cool if we could get a bit of a community going of local businesses that are all in the kind of coding world, where we can, can share tips and tricks together. So yeah, I'll share that out, but it would be cool to see you guys there if you're willing and able. Other questions that come in. You mentioned before React is not always the best choice. Can you touch on that further? Yeah, so something important to understand, one of the main reasons why React is often selected, and Damien just educated me on this the other day, basically comes down to the fact that a lot of these models are trained with open source code in GitHub. It just so happens that a lot of that code is React code. And so inherently it's biased to want to build things on React because it knows that the best. But Damien, you can probably talk to this better than I can, but in a lot of cases, React is overkill for the types of applications you're going to be building for yourself. And the main reason that's important is token usage on things like Codex and Claude Code. It is going to use a lot more tokens to write the code that you need, to debug the code, to add features, etc. So you can burn through your usage limits a whole lot quicker when it's got more complex code that it's having to deal with. At least that's kind of understanding. I don't know, Damien, if you've got anything else you'd like to add to that.
Also building complexity. So React requires additional tools, the building step, which mostly is just not needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Janine. We'll chat to you later. Can you provide more info on training a new GPT, maybe with previous code stack? Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's a good question. So yeah, provide more information on training a new GPT, maybe with previous code stack from ex-developers or existing project. There's what's the best way to put this? Codex is actually, and Claude Code are very good at picking up projects partway through. So if you let's say you have an existing code base that you want it to read through, you can absolutely connect it in and then have it learn and help you with additional development. I've done it where I've given it some initial code from another project and said, we're building something similar, and I want you to take learnings from this code and apply it to the new project. So in my case, using the desktop version, I just pull that code to my desktop, and then I give the AI access to that code to read through initially. Can use a lot of tokens to go through and learn it, depending on how complex that code is. But absolutely a good way to potentially, if you want things to connect together later on and that sort of thing, it is a good option. Hopefully that answers the question, but if I've misunderstood there, let me know. If, for instance, uploaded code through Lovable EC can Claude, yeah, absolutely. So we've done sites where we've been given the lovable code. We were able to use Claude Code, for example, to go through and find the bits that were unnecessary and bloated, and strip that back to something that's tidier. As Damien says, it depends a little bit on complexity of the app and that sort of thing. But I had one recently where I had forgot to put the guardrails in place on what I wanted to build, and I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. It built a whole application for me in React. And then I realized what I'd done, and I went in and I got it to rewrite the whole application for me, using the internal frameworks that Damien has set for us. And yeah, it burned a whole lot of tokens, I guess you could say, unnecessarily from my own mistake, but it was able to rebuild the whole application. There were a few little bugs and things I had to deal with after the fact, but comparing it to back in the day where that would have been an absolute disaster, in the greater scheme of things, it wasn't a big deal. So it is all possible. Turn the light on a bit, it's getting a bit dark here. Cool. Anything else I can help with? Anybody? Cool. Plan mode earlier is a good practice for every change, even minor changes, to always have it run in plan mode. So question around plan mode. So I probably overuse plan mode a little bit. Any big change that I'm going to do, I use plan mode on, which I think is good practice. More often than not, particularly if I'm trying to debug something, I'll use plan mode. I find it does a better job of logically thinking through the issue. But yeah, for small quick changes, or like you just want it to change some text, or it's a layout issue, that sort of thing, you don't necessarily need to use plan mode. I don't know, Damien, what's your experience been there?
In my experience, Claude Code sometimes just ignores my request for plan mode, because besides there's too small task to bother and just I'll do it right away.
Yeah.
So yeah, but plan mode basically it helps to structure the task. So if task has any number of steps inside it, it's better to use plan mode. If you just replace these steps, you don't need plan mode.
Yeah, and particularly if you haven't talked about it a whole lot today, but if you are trying to get the system to integrate with a third-party API, you obviously want to use plan mode for that, because it'll actually go through, read the API documentation, make a plan around how that API documentation ties into what you have built. And then once again, for debugging, if the API is not performing the way you expect, or you're not getting the result, plan mode is excellent at going through and digging through the logic between your application and that API to try and work out where the disconnect is, basically. Are you guys based in New Zealand? We are. Yes, we're both based in New Zealand. I'm in Waikato. Damien's on the North Shore in Auckland. So yeah, maybe at some stage we could do an in-person meetup as well, which would be cool. Awesome. I think we're kind of here with the questions, unless there's any more. But yeah, I will send out the recording. I'll send out the GPT, and along with a few other resources, and then I'll share information on how you guys could join the free community that we're setting up. And it'd be great to, if we could get that community buzzing, and happy to share more tips and tricks there, and maybe we could run the security session through there as well. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll give a couple more minutes if there's any last minute questions. Otherwise, I think we'll call it there. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon as well. Yeah, this has been fun. We'll do some more together.